Today's webinar is called Breaking the 70% Barrier, a New Approach to TM Threshold Optimization. We know that many organizations rely on the 70% default simply because it's the default setting and it's been here for a while. But today we want to offer you a different approach where you can make informed decisions about how to leverage your resources based on data and tailored to your specific projects. To walk you through the topic, we are joined by two wonderful speakers. Firstly, Martin Švestka, Director of Product Management, who will set the scene for us by explaining the wider context of the challenges that we see organizations come across when it comes to managing and working with various resources. And he will also touch on how at Phrase we are trying to make this decision-making easier with data-driven approach. Next, we have Olga Stokoviec, our product manager, who will take us into Phrase itself and show us a particular example of what we're bringing to our customers. She will take us for an in-product demo of our brand new powerful tool, the TM Threshold Optimizer, that helps you really optimize and fine-tune your pre-translation process. So with that intro done, I can hand over to Martin. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Clara, for the wonderful intro. You're right. I'm glad that I can be here to share the wider context of the optimizations that we're trying to pursue and then the tools that we're trying to equip you with. So excited to be here. And I want to start with this perfect workflow idea. You may remember a couple of years ago, the life was pretty easy. The only things that we could mix together were pretty much translation memories and machine translation. And then on top of it, of course, the human translation. But if you fast forward to today, then the mix of technologies is just pretty wide. It's almost like you're kind of walking into this buffet of technologies and you need to mix them together to define the ideal workflow. And it's not easy. All of these come with the various settings and thresholds and then options. And then it's not only about mixing the list that you have on the screen, but also knowing how to set them properly. So you got a TMs, traditional TMs, you've got a machine translation engines, you've got quite a few of them actually to select from. You now have those versions that can actually combine your TM and the MT segments, kind of sections in a single segment. So not only that you have to decide between a TM or MT for a segment, you get to combine them together. You can take those TMs and you can use them to train your own machine translation engines and models. You can use a GenAI as a machine translation engine to simply produce some output. You can use it in more sophisticated way where you combine it with your TM entries, find the closest TM entries, and then sort of use it in the prompt as a few-shot prompting to get more relevant output. You can use GenAI basically on a document level to tweak it into certain segments. Maybe you're done with the translation and you want to target specific age group, or you can, on top of it, of course, have human to review it, at least part of the translations. And all of that combined somehow will result in a workflow, but you probably feel quite uneasy about that you're not running the ideal mix of these things and with the proper settings that would get you the ideal business outcomes that you're chasing, right? Now, to make it actually worse, not only that finding the right combination today is difficult, it's changing all the time. There's going to be new technologies in the future. If not new technologies, there may be new player in GenAI or new models that may be OpenAI releases. And then the model that works today, or maybe you're not even using one of the models, but when there's one release that has different quality of the output, that has different performance, that may impact how you combine things together. So it's constantly changing, and it's really becoming quite difficult for the localization teams to keep up with all these changes and the complexity. So what do you do? So there's really only two things you could do. One of them is that you sort of give up on that pursuit of the ideal workflow. Maybe you don't have as much pressure to come up with that, and a good enough workflow is just working for you fine. That's possible. The other option, of course, is that if it's too complex today, we'll have to find a way to simplify it, right? We'll have to find a way to remove that complexity from all of this. In idealist scenario, we'll design it in a way that this becomes a black box for you. So you don't care what's inside, how it gets kind of a mixed together, how things get set on very low level kind of settings. But all you care about is that when you give it an input, it mixes the right things together to get you the ideal output, right? For your scenario. That's really important, that for your use case. So you do have certain parameters, certain criteria that the translation should meet. And ideally, you feed those criteria into this black box and you get what you need. So let's go to the next slide. So instead of talking to this black box in those low-level parameters like thresholds and then options like that you want to auto-confirm maybe the 100 and 101 segments and then all these things, like if you actually look at the phrase TMS pre-translation screen that does part of this automation, that screen on its own has about 25 different options, all kinds of Booleans and then thresholds in there. Now, that's a very low-level setting. What we really need to do is sort of elevate the game and talk in terms of the business KPIs, business parameters. I mean, ultimately, it's a localization project. So as a project, it has that magic triangle of time, scope, resource, or in our case, typically it's time, quality, and then the cost, right? And what's interesting is that these are typically the parameters that your stakeholders are talking to you. So when you have a marketing team or you have the engineering team or the product team with some UI to translate, when you have the support team coming to you, then they will be talking to you in terms of the timeline. So here's our deployment workflow. This is how much time we have for the localization in it. Here's our use case. It's a user-generated content. We need a real-time translation. Here's a marketing content. Time is not an essence, but the quality is. Here's a documentation. It doesn't have to be as readable, but it has to stick to the terminology, right? So these are basically the exchanges, these conversations that you're probably having with your stakeholders. In an ideal scenario, you can take them, and then that would be on the next slide. You can take them and you can feed them directly in this black box. And the black box then combines these TMs, MTs, GenAI, and then whatnot to generate output that meets those requirements, the time, quality, and cost requirements. So you don't have to care about any of that. This is all basically done for you. Now, notice that there are some of the pieces that are already working that way, and I'll actually talk about it in a couple of minutes. But the important part is that the system is not forcing you to do, first of all, some research and exploration how it should be set. It can receive these parameters directly. And then the second is that it actually can keep up with it, right? So as the technology mix is changing, then automatically, things get ingested in the middle. It may sound kind of a far-fetched and it may be kind of too visionary or too out there. But if you think about it, if you roll back a couple of years ago, when the only thing maybe that we had available was a TM, the TM was a little bit of a black box as well. You were passing it some segment and it would give you the closest segment that it had stored. And you really didn't care how it worked inside, what kind of algorithms were used. There's some engrams with a tons of settings, how you can fine tune it. This was all kind of abstracted from you. The same thing is machine translation. There's a lot of logic inside of that, but you don't really care about that, right? So this is the similar abstraction that we're hoping we can get, right? So I think it's about a time to sort of reinvent this. And as opposed to talking about these low-level things, we again kind of roll it up to something a little higher level, and then we start working at that level. Let's go to the next slide. And here, I apologize. I'm going to go a little bit academic on you. I'm going to talk a little bit about closed loop systems, but I'll use an analogy to make it a little more understandable. So when you're riding a bicycle, it's not that easy, right? To balance it, to steer, to get from point A to point B that can be miles away without falling. But you manage to do it because there's a lot of data that you consume through your eyes, through your vestibular system and all of that kind of stuff that is fed to your brain, and then based on that, the brain basically tells the hands whether they should hit the brake or steer, or if you should pedal more or not. And all of that is thanks to the fact that is all this data and feedback fed back to your control system, to your brain. Without that, it wouldn't work, right? If you put a sack of potatoes on that bicycle, you could push it out and it would maybe ride for a couple of yards, a couple of meters, but then it would fall very quickly. And that's because there's just no way for the back sack of potatoes to respond basically to the fact that it's going sideways. And the sack of potatoes is actually what we would call an open loop system. It doesn't have any feedback loop. There are pretty successful open loop systems. Typically, when it's quite simple, you can set the initial parameters. You can kind of push it in the right direction, and it works. It goes in that direction. But anything that is a little more complex, like riding a bicycle or running a translation workflow, requires that feedback loop. So this is where I would like to highlight the role of analytics. So analytics is actually the feedback loop, right? We're measuring tons of stuff on the output, and we're using it to feed it back into that algorithm. Let's be a little more concrete. So today we're actually doing some of that stuff already. We've had it for a couple of years, and an example feature that I can think of is the auto select that exists within the language AI. So we use lots of data that we've collected over the time. And then we use it to evaluate which engine is going to do the best for given language pair and domain. That's an example, basically, how the analytics then automatically fits into workflow that switches between the right engine. Now, the difference between that and what we have now is that the data that we had was data that we used sort of internally to train that algorithm. But it's not something that you can observe, something that you can fine tune or, play with. It's basically something that we have available, and then we're just giving you sort of the result of that, right? The September release, when we introduced a couple of new releases, included a very different approach to it. We actually want to productize the data. So we want to make the data available. We want to visualize it. We want to turn it into insightful insights. We want to give it to you from having those insights in very understandable way, all the way to very raw data that you can also observe yourself and discover yourself. So the data that we're collecting now is available, and we will feed it back to these algorithms and it is in two ways. And for one, we will feed it back to you so you can make the right decisions for yourself, or we will feed it back all the way to the algorithm so they can automatically adjust. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the analytics piece. So first of all, there's different types of analytics. We already had tons of analytics in the system. You can monitor your volumes, you can monitor your leverage and such. The volumes is an example of a data that is interesting, and you make certain decisions on it. You want to see how many words you processed, perhaps. But at the same time, it's a different types of analytics. The analytics I'm talking about here is analytics that is truly giving you some insight and that is actionable. So we're targeting very specific decisions that you need to make when you're designing your workflows, and we're trying to provide you with the data that will help you to make the decisions. So the way that you're going to experience it in the system is, number one, is that whenever there's a relevant place, we'll integrate that recommendation and that insight right into that place. And Olga will show you in the demo very shortly. So for example, if we can calculate the TM threshold, the best place to show it is in the place where you are configuring that TM threshold, right? And then so these are going to be very targeted and specific recommendations. At the same time, the use cases vary. So we want to give you also access over the data, and you can pivot the data and filter it in your own way. So there's going to be a set of charts. There are actually set of search charts. So what I want to emphasize is that it's actually something that released a couple of weeks ago. So what I'm talking about, while on the previous slides I was talking about a kind of long-term vision, here I'm already talking about things that were released a couple of weeks ago. So you already have, if you open up your phrase analytics, a new tab that is called, I think, TM threshold, and then you'll set a series of charts there. And then you can slice them in some ways, and then you will get more details about what's happening in your system with your data. And that's aggregated data. But on top of the aggregated data, we want to give you also access to the raw data. So for the TM threshold, what we use is a segment level analytics. So what it means is that we collect data about every single segment. There's quite a few metadata for each segment that we collect. And then from there, we aggregate and derive these insights. But we also want to give you access to the every single segment metadata. That would be done through phrase data. So phrase data, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a tool that gives you access to a set of tables. As of now, there's 23 database tables, and you get to query them any way you want. And these tables include things like high level, the projects, the jobs, but they go all the way to the segments. So tremendous amount of data that is there for you. You can combine it with your other business tools or business data and then derive some really insightful matters from it. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the long-term vision is helping you to optimize, helping you to design these workflows, ideally take it to the point that the workflows are automatically sort of architected and, and then the right tools are combined to accomplish those top level goals in terms of quality, cost, and then the speed. But we have to make first stepping stones. So the first step in that direction is helping you to optimize the TM threshold. Why TM threshold? So the TM threshold is really interesting. It's one of the key parameters in the systems, but we saw that the customers are often confused by what it should be. They felt like there's really no guidance what it should be. There was confusion what the impact of that is. And we saw most of the customers still running the 70% here. So the 70% comes from the fact that it's the default value. When we ask the customers why they're using that value, often the answer is pretty much because that's how it always was, or because that's perhaps the industry standard, or because that's the default value in the system. But you could tell that there's very few who actually research what the right value should be and then try to optimize it. And that's unfortunate because this single value can actually tremendously impact the efficiency of your workflow. So we've done is that we've collected data, very low level data, segment level data, tremendous amount of data. It's close to 1 billion rows that actually were fit into this chart. The exact number is one of the blog posts. I think it was 900 something million, so close to 1 billion. And then we plotted the editing time of the segments coming from translation memories based on their fuzzy score. As you would expect, anything that is high fuzzy score, 100, 101, is gonna be very little. And as you would expect, anything that has lower fuzzy score, the editing time is growing. So you can see that the line on the right side is growing. What we didn't expect is that at some point it's going to stop and it's going to be flat, and it's stopping at around 93. So when the fuzzy score is 93 or below, then it kind of doesn't actually matter, right? It's still the same editing time. The hypothesis here is that the segments with such a low score are so low quality that they pretty much get rewritten. So it doesn't matter if it's 93 or 70 or 80, it's pretty much, at a point or at a quality that the linguists are rewriting it. Now, this was a little shocking to us. We have to admit, we didn't expect that. So we used two different methods to collect the data, kind of what I would call from front end and the back end, two different methodologies, a little bit different sampling, and both came with the same conclusion. So this should be very solid, the data that we have here. Another interesting data point is the 98 there. The purple line shows the average editing time of machine translation segment. And then here, of course, it's not something that has a fuzzy score. So we're plotting the average time. That's a flat line. And then what we're interested in is seeing where these two lines cross, because when they cross, you know that the amount of time on average that is spent on the TM and MT is the same. Anytime the orange, the translation memory, is below the purple, you know that the translation memory entries are performing better, and then the linguists are spending less time. And again, a little bit to our surprise, that has to be very high fuzzy score. The 98 and above, again, 98 and above, 97 and below, on average, the data shows that you're spending more time on TM entries than on machine translation entries on average. And this is actually a little bit, the chart, the way that we are collecting is a little bit disadvantageous for MT. The reason for that is because MT tends to be longer segments. We also measured that. So if you normalize that per word, the purple would actually beat the orange even earlier with even higher scores. But we are leaving it to make it simple to understand what the chart represents. We're kind of leaving it at the segment level. So 98 is kind of the magic number. Now, this is across all organizations. This is all aggregated the data. And then, but what we're giving you is the same data just for your organization, because every organization is a little bit different. And then, of course, your use cases are specific. So we're giving you also the data for your organization. So I have sample organizations here. They're blinded charts. The message here is that you can see that the charts tend to be very similar. There's always kind of the flattening, and there's always some place where it crosses the line. Sometimes it may be 98, sometimes it may be a little smaller number. So if we can calculate that smaller number for you, for your organization, because you have enough data, then we are giving it to you, and then we'll see that in the demo. We want to also admit, to be very open about that sometimes if you don't have enough data, or if there's some specific situation, then it may not produce nice charts like that, and it may be a little more difficult to interpret that. If you look at the bottom right corner, then you can see that in the chart. Here, very likely what's happening is that the organization has already TM threshold set to higher value, and therefore there's very little segments with fuzzy score, with the low fuzzy scores, right? Or at least on some projects, it's set to higher value. If you actually look at the phrase analytics data, we're also giving you statistics about how many segments at what fuzzy bucket how many you have, right? So you can assess how statistically significant samples you have. Okay, so that's kind of the theory, and then with that, I'll pass it to my colleague Olga, and then she can show you around a little bit.
Thanks a lot, Martin. So now I am also taking over the screen sharing. And with this demo, I will walk you all through Phrase TMS UI, show you where we are putting the TM threshold recommendation and where you can find deeper insights into that and where all these numbers are coming from. So as Martin mentioned in his part, the TM threshold is the critical part of the pre-translation settings. So of course, to find the pre-translation settings, they sit in the project configuration. So if you click on the new project to create, you will see immediately that there is this little pink icon next to the pre-translation section. And if you hover over it, it tells you that there's a new threshold recommendation. So we'll go there in a second, but we need to fill out the required fields first. So I will name it a test project, and I will put some placeholder source and target languages. And with that, we can move to the pre-translation section. And there you can see that we will have a ping frame telling you what the recommended threshold is. So we're not imposing anything. We're not preventing you from using your own settings. We're not touching what you have in the pre-translation edit field, but we are offering a recommendation. And where does this even come from? And this is something that Martin already has touched upon. If you have enough data, this recommended threshold is calculated based on your data. So it's a custom recommendation based on the data that you have in your Phrase TMS. If you do not have enough data, like in this case, you will get the recommendation based on the aggregated, anonymized data that we have in Phrase TMS. that is averaged out to present you with this objectivized recommended value. And because we want everyone to make informed decisions on how they set up and configure their projects, and we want everyone to fine-tune the project the way it works for them, we also offer some deeper insights into where this value is coming from, because that was our goal from the very beginning, that of course we cannot just say, hey, maybe 70% is not the best TM threshold. We want to also tell you why there might be some room for optimization and improvement, so that you can configure this and update this yourself. So when you click on see why, one of two things can happen. If you do have enough data, you will be redirected to analytics, where you will be shown a lot of charts. If you do not have enough data, you will be redirected to our Help Center article about TM Threshold Optimizer, which I hope you can see at the moment on the screen. Great, I see nodding, awesome. And here in this Help Center article, we are digging a little deeper into how we're calculating the recommended threshold, what we're taking into consideration, and we even give some examples as to step-by-step what process we're going through to present you with the recommendation. But I think the most interesting thing here is to, what does it mean, enough data? How do I know if I have enough data to have the custom threshold recommended? And there is this section that also explains that. So in order to have a custom recommendation for the TM threshold, there have to be 3 criteria met together. Those criteria are that you have jobs completed within the previous 6 months. So your account is pretty active, there's something happening. You have at least 1,000 segments that were pre-translated with machine translation. And then you have at least 300 segments that were pre-translated with translation memory. And those, you have at least one fuzzy score bucket. So we have these 70 to 74, 75 to 79, etc. And you have at least one of these buckets filled with at least 300 segments pre-translated with translation memory. And if you have that, you will be able to see analytics. And if there's a little less data in your account, you still are able to access analytics, but we will have this sort of frame display telling you that probably the quality of your data, the quality of the charts will increase if there are more segments running through your account. Let's go to the analytics then. And there are many tabs. You can explore different data, different metrics around your translation project. And the new one that we added with the TM Threshold Optimizer is quite self-explanatorily called the TM Threshold. And here, if you click on that, you will see 3 charts. And I will quickly walk you through what these charts mean and what they are. So the first one is showing the average segment editing time by the TM match category. And this is what Martin was already talking about. So we have these 2 lines. The blue one is the average time spent on editing machine translation pre-translated segments. And the orange one is showing you the time you spend editing segments pre-translated by translation memory. And this is also clustered into the different buckets of TM matches. And you can see that the better the quality of the TM match gets, the higher the bucket is, the higher the match is, the lower the editing time, until we get to the magic moments where these lines cross. And it means, and this is where our recommendation stands. So the TM threshold recommendation is the threshold above which the editing time is lower for the translation memory pre-translated segments than for the machine translation memory. I said that right. Translation memory pre-translated segments, and for the MT pre-translated segments, because you can see that if you want to increase your productivity, it's very easy to see in this chart that for lower fuzzy matches, it's probably better to run those segments through machine translation because it will be faster for you to post-edit it than if you run them through lower quality translation memory. So it's probably better to invest in machine translation in order to see time savings there. Then the second chart is a really interesting tool for further explorations and for maybe preparing forecasts on how much time you can save when you apply the TM threshold optimizer. This chart is showing you TM segments by TM match category. So it is showing you how many segments you have with different fuzzy scores. And for example, if you have 1,000 segments where the editing time for the TM is 2 seconds longer than for the MT pre-translation, you can easily sort of calculate how much time you could save if those segments were pre-translated with a machine translation instead of translation memory. So this is a really interesting tool for forecasting the productivity and for advocating for machine translation, and even if not for machine translation, then for increasing the quality of your TM matches and increasing the TM threshold to really get meaningful TM matches and TM scores. And then the third chart, I would say that this is a very useful tool for tracking how your productivity increases, or maybe checking what you can tweak in order to improve the productivity. So that third chart is showing the average segment editing time from all the sources month by month. So that means that if you apply the higher TM threshold and your editing time will decrease, then possibly you will also see that these blocks in this chart will also be getting shorter, meaning that your productivity has increased and your editing time will be overall lower from all the sources. So while the second chart can be useful to forecast the increase of productivity and the time savings, this third chart can actually help you track the past if the implementations, the adjustments that you have introduced are actually bringing you closer to your productivity goal. And then if something looks interesting, suspicious, you can also maybe explore different options, what to tweak, what to update. Maybe it's worth cleaning up the translation memory. Maybe it's worth adjusting the empty engines. So there are many possibilities here to really play around and see what can go differently, what can go better, and where you can optimize. And because we know that there are so many different content types and there are so many different possibilities, language pairs, domains, when you are planning your localization process, we have also introduced this project template filter. And so if you filter by your project template, you will get the data for the segments in jobs that belong for a specific project template. And that will help you narrow down a little the results that you're getting, and also will help you differentiate and check how this data looks like for different project templates for different project types. So this is where TM threshold stands and sits in analytics. And I think with that, I'm looking at my cheat sheet, but I think I've covered everything. With that, I will pass back to Clara and Martin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. I'm going to just share my screen for a moment. And just before we dive into the questions from you today, Martin wanted to cover some frequently asked questions that he's come across before. And over to you, Martin.
Yeah, we're sort of anticipating a few questions because we, as we were developing this in the last, I think, 4 months, we already had an opportunity to share with a few customers, and that was the typical questions that came from those interviews are listed on the screen. So I'll walk through those, but I want to say we're definitely hunger for feedback because this is a new area. It's a little bit ambitious. It's uncharted. Like we were basically trying to take the data to a whole new level, generate some insights, and we need to really collaborate with you to make sure that we're heading in the right direction and we're providing something that is useful. So I'll start with the last question, actually. If you're interested in learning more, and if you want to get in touch with us, then Clara will be sending follow-ups after this. And then part of that is going to be some snippet of information how you can get in touch with us. There's also a blog post posted on phrase.com/blog. The blog post, I think, it's not a featured one. I think it's the second one that is listed. It starts with 98. And then so there's also more information in there. All right, so which plans is this available in? So we're trying to make it available as many plans as possible. And there are plans, however, some plans that don't have analytics. And then so the lowest plans, whether that's the legacy team start or the lowest that we have now, the freelancer license and then the starter, those don't have it. All other plans have that. The editing time. So we got a few questions about editing time. So what is the editing time exactly? So the editing time is the time when you enter the segment until you exit the segment. So as you're going through the cat pane and cat editor, and then you're moving from segments to segment, you pretty much confirm a segment, it jumps onto the new segment, and you're spending some time thinking about it, and then you update it, and then you confirm it again and kind of moves out to the next segment. So on the entry until the exit, that's the time that we're measuring. Why not use edit the distance? So this is sort of related to what I just described. So edit distance is pretty used. It's a little bit of a love and hate actually situation because the edit distance is a good metric. It's pretty well established in the localization industry, but its problem is that it's reducing it's sort of not representing the cognitive effort behind the translation. It reduces everything to just the keystrokes and measuring the keystrokes. So you're basically just coming in, you're thinking about it, and then you do a few edits, and it just measures the edits. That's where the editing time sort of does this better because it also takes into account the amount of time that you are spending on thinking through, like how you should update that. We will run some studies in the future to see if we can correlate the edit distance or editing time, and then how they kind of correlate. But at this moment, editing time is the choice. What about my coffee time? So I'm editing a segment. I get a call. I need to pick it up. I need to pick up a package. Somebody's ringing the door, or I want to get a coffee. Yes, so we do see in the data segments that have very large editing times, and it's kind of a noise probably caused by one of these situations. So what we do, we just remove anything that is above 30 seconds. Now, why 30 seconds? So there's not a big science behind that. At some point, you just have to kind of draw a line somewhere. But if you look at the editing times on average, they're about 20 seconds. When it's edited segment, then it's about 20 seconds. That's for the low fuzzy scores, right? So the high fuzzy scores could be just seconds, but then where the line flattens, if you remember that chart, then it's about 20 to 22 seconds on average. So we give it another 50%, and it's the threshold, the 30-second threshold. Of course, we'll remove some of the valid editing times, but that's okay. When we actually did the study and compare those levels, different levels, then the chart was pretty much the same. It was, if you leave all the segments there, it's going to be a little more jittery. But as for the breaking points, where it kind of starts cutting down and such, was pretty much the same. Which segments are included? So Olga actually talked about it a little bit, like some of the requirements about the job. So the job has to be, we take segments from jobs that have to be completely completed. And because otherwise we would factor in jobs that were just imported for maybe testing purposes of your import settings. So we just take sort of healthy ones. It has to be completed so that we know there was some effort behind that. And then we take the segments from it. And I've already talked to you about the learning more. So Clara, I think back to you for Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions, so let me head over to Slido and let's start from the top. Paula is asking, with this new TM threshold feature, would phrase stop sending to machine translation all the segments?
I don't know if you want the short answer. The short answer is yes. It's actually something that will release in about 3 weeks max. The longer answer is that this was purposeful by design, and then the reason for that is because we were trying to make on-the-fly decision between what's better, that TM match or that's the MT sort of suggestion. And then we used to, you may remember if you were with us for a couple of years, we used to have MTQE, which was based on the post-edit distance, the scoring, and that was calibrated to be comparable to the fuzzy scores. So we could compare those two scores, even though they were not speaking exactly the same language, and then make a decision between which one is better, TM or MT. Now we've changed that a little bit to the QPS that is based more as a predictive score, that is predicting how much, what would be the score from MQM frameworks. And it's a little bit different logic, so they don't compare as well to the fuzzy score. So that's why we're gonna be sort of turning it off, so to speak.
All right, thank you. Next question from Vincent. For the editing time, are you considering the segment length, since this is not only related to the fuzzy level, but also the segment length?
Yeah, so I think I briefly mentioned that if you normalize it per word, so if you divide a segment by the number of words, then you get very similar chart. It's just that the y-axis is going to be at a different scale. And what actually is happening is that the purple line, which is representing the MT, gets even a little bit lower, because on average, the MT segments tend to be longer than the TM segments. So in terms of compare between MT and TM, actually, that is the only change that you would see sort of on the chart, other than the y-axis absolute numbers. Now, we've debated a lot whether we should present this chart, the normalized chart, or the segment level chart that we're presenting now. And then we sort of went for, because it made no difference in terms of decision making, we went for a chart that is more readable, because you're doing the editing on a segment level. Your brain sort of functions on, okay, I want to know how much I'm spending on that segment, right? And so these are the numbers basically that represent the segment. But this is an interesting feedback. If you found, again, like we're really hungry for feedback, if you found out that for reasons, it makes sense to also normalize it, maybe present both, then that's something that we could consider.
Thank you, Martin. Next one, jobs completed in the last 6 months, which is one of the criteria for data to be involved. It's not really measurable because it can vary a lot. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, so basically what we are saying is that we could go way back, right? We could go back year for sure. If you actually look at the data, if you had a phrase data and you look into the tables, I believe we're actually giving you the entire 12 months, last 12 months of the data. But we also know that things change, like your workflows have changed, maybe you've changed the engine and so on and so forth. So there's a decay in the quality of the data over time because of these changes. So we just basically found some reasonable balance, and then we went for 6 months. But if you remember from Olga's demo, there was a filter, and in the filter you can actually set the time to custom value. The 6 months is the default, but you can set it to custom value. So all it basically means that there's that we're balancing between the age of the data and the decay of the data, and then make sure that it provides something insightful.
Perfect. Thank you. And what seems to be the last question for now? What factors account for the difference between translation memory editing time and machine translation editing time?
Okay, this is a loaded question, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be answering this properly. And I don't feel like it would deserve a separate webinar because it's kind of getting into the science, the why. I think we're sort of presenting the what, right? Like, here's objective data that shows what it is. And then there's different factors. And it's almost like, okay, now we have to research why that is to better understand. But it's more like getting into the psychology. Well, I don't know, maybe a few thoughts on this, right? So one, I know generally the industry loves translation memories, and then the MT is a little bit on the side. But and there's some advantages to TMs. Like TMs, even though they're maybe lower score, like at least they're close to what you translated before. So what happens is you basically see a sample translated before that is close, and then it helps you maybe with consistency, right? But the problem with the TMs is that unless it's 100% or 101, it is not the translation that you can use, because even the 99% means that all we found in a TM something that is close to what you translated before, but it's not what you're translating today, which means is we're giving you what you translated before, but because your string now, your segment now is different, you will have to more than likely go and edit that. And even a single letter can make a big difference, right? So the advantage of MT, and I think that's why we're seeing better performance of MT, especially for the lower fuzzy, right? Like compared to lower fuzzy, is because MT actually gives you the final translation, right? It will translate it based on your input string. It's not just what is close to it. It's just that it's trying to translate the actual source string. So what it means is that you will maybe require some edits, but it's not going to be as severe as it is for the low fuzzy matches. So these are some of the factors that one has to consider when sort of elaborating on this. But again, it's probably something that would require a separate webinar. It's pretty loaded question. Hopefully, I'm answering at least part of it.
Thanks for the idea, Martin. Maybe we can do that one. All right. And what I think we will cover as a last question because of time is going to be this one. Are you planning to add more filters to TM threshold tab? The information currently is not really readable since it merges all projects into one.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So we realized that. So we managed to sort of squeeze in the scope the project template, because often that's what we see, that the use case, you got a template for maybe documentation, you got a template for your UI project, and then so often that's perfectly well aligned with the type of content or use case, so you can just filter by the template in that list. But in some cases that may not be good enough. You may have templates that are per individual language, so you have multiple templates basically for the same use case. So maybe grouping it by metadata on the content, metadata on the project, it's another way to slice it. And again, excuse me, I would invite kind of the feedback for sure. So help us to sort of maybe with the use cases that we should be focusing on first. But for sure, we understand that the filtering needs to improve.
Yeah, and in general, we will be building on this feature. This was just the first iteration, and we're taking a leap. We're introducing something new. We're giving extra insights into the data. But of course, this is also what Martin mentioned in the beginning, that we're hungry for feedback. We're hungry for insights from our customers. And definitely our goal is to gradually build and provide more data, more granular and just tailor what we develop to the actual needs of the living and breathing localization workflows.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Olga and Martin, for the presentation. Thank you for all of the questions. As Olga and Martin both said, they were really looking forward to hearing from you, your thoughts and your feedback. And tomorrow I will be sharing a recording of this session with you all, together with some steps in case you want to discuss this with us further, and also a link to Martin's latest blog article, so you can also read up some more information and yeah, follow up with us. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Olga and Martin, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.